Imagine a massive nuclear-powered battleship navigating the open ocean.
Right.
And for decades, it's followed one specific navigational chart, relying on, one highly specific imported type of fuel. But now,
Now the captain gets new orders.
exactly, the captain gets orders to not only change course by 180 degrees, but to completely rebuild the ship's engines from scratch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and here's the catch. They have to do it while still cutting through the waves at full speed without dropping a single knot.
That's not exactly a gentle, graceful turn.
No, not at all. It requires immense power, brutal structural realignment, and absolute coordination. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking a stack of policy sources that detail exactly that kind of maneuver India's green push. And looking through these documents, it becomes immediately clear that we shouldn't just be reading this as standard environmental news.
Definitely not.
I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar shift in national security.
Yeah, it is a fundamental rewiring of a nation's economic engine. What's fascinating here is that we are watching a deliberate shift from a country simply demonstrating technological capabilities on a global stage to one actualizing true strategic autonomy.
Right.
The energy transition detailed in these sources is being weaponized, and I mean that in a strictly economic sense, as a tool for resilience.
Right. And if you are tracking the geopolitical forces shaping the next few decades, whether you're prepping for an exam or a high-level policy meeting, understanding the mechanics of this shift is just mandatory.
Absolutely.
We're going to extract the critical data points and those hidden governance patterns from these briefings to show you exactly how this is happening.
So we have a pretty clear roadmap today.
We do. The roadmap covers 3 core areas. We have the immediate transition happening right now via ethanol.
Okay.
Then the structural heavy industry revolution via green hydrogen. And finally, we have to look at the financial architecture powering this massive armada, which brings us to sovereign green bonds.
The money behind it all.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the most immediate consumer-facing change. What actually goes into our vehicle fuel tanks today?
The ethanol acceleration. This is basically the strategy designed to bridge the immediate present to the long-term future.
Yeah, and the numbers and the sources outline a massive chronological leap. I mean, the government's target for 20% ethanol blending in petrol, what is referred to as E20, has been aggressively pulled forward.
The original target was 2030, right?
Yeah, originally 2030, now it is 2025.
Wow.
And to actually execute that, the domestic production capacity has to more than double. It's jumping from about 700 core liters to roughly 1,500 core liters.
I mean, pulling a national infrastructure target of this scale forward by 5 whole years is, it's almost unheard of in administrative policy.
It's incredibly fast.
It really signals an extreme level of urgency.
Yeah.
They aren't just moving a goalpost. They're forcing an entire supply chain, from the farms to the fuel depots, to operate at hyperspeed.
But I want to talk about the friction of that hyperspeed. Because I was reading through the mechanical realities in the sources, and the transition isn't exactly seamless for the end user.
No, it rarely is.
Right. It's like taking a competitive marathon runner who is used to a very specific diet and changing their caloric intake overnight.
Good analogy.
Yes, they will still run, but their body requires serious recalibration. And the sources are very transparent about the negative impacts of E20 on current vehicles.
Right, the efficiency drop.
Exactly. We are looking at a 6 to 7% drop in fuel efficiency for four-wheelers. Plus, ethanol is highly corrosive.
Yeah, it is.
It eats away at the plastic and rubber components inside traditional internal combustion engines. So we are essentially saving the country money, but I might have to explain to my mechanic why the rubber seals in my 10-year-old hatchback have completely dissolved.
Which is a tough conversation to have.
It is. So I have to ask, is the environmental payoff actually worth the performance loss and the potential engine damage for the everyday consumer?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look past the individual tailpipe to see the macroeconomic trade-off.
Okay.
This is essentially an economic two-step. Step 1 is the immediate balance of payments. Achieving this E20 blending level results in an estimated annual savings of 30,000 crore rupees in foreign exchange.
30,000 crore.
Yes. That is 30,000 crore rupees staying inside the domestic economy instead of being wired overseas to import crude oil from, volatile regions.
That is a staggering amount of capital retention just from tweaking the fuel mixture.
It is. But the second step is where the underlying governance strategy really clicks into place. It's the agricultural pivot.
Oh, right. Because ethanol is farmed.
Exactly. Ethanol doesn't come from a well. It comes from farmers. So while you're actively reducing the national import bill, you are simultaneously creating massive, assured, federally backed markets for domestic agriculture.
You are replacing foreign oil tycoons with domestic farmers in your energy supply chain.
Precisely.
The immediate pushback there, though, is the classic food versus fuel conflict. I mean, if we are suddenly redirecting all these crops into distilleries to make 1,500 crore liters of fuel, how do we protect the food supply?
Yeah, that's a huge concern, but the policy actively engineers its way around that exact pitfall. The roadmap deliberately shifts the focus away from critical food staples.
So what are they using instead?
It encourages farmers to cultivate water-efficient crops, specifically maize explicitly for ethanol production. But more importantly, the strategy leans heavily into producing ethanol from non-food feedstocks,
Like what?
agricultural residues, and damaged food grains that are totally unfit for human consumption.
Ah, so they are monetizing the waste.
Exactly. They're taking agricultural byproducts that would normally just rot in a silo or be burned in a field and turning them into a primary energy source.
That's smart.
Yeah, they avoid the food-fuel conflict while actively creating a secondary income stream for the rural economy.
It is essentially a closed-loop wealth transfer. You save 30,000 crore on imported crude, and you redirect a massive chunk of that capital directly into domestic rural infrastructure.
Exactly.
That makes total sense for passenger cars and light transport. But ethanol only solves the problem of, like, a Honda Civic or a delivery scooter.
Right, which is why we have to look at the second major move. Because ethanol does absolutely nothing for the hard-to-abate sectors.
The heavy industry.
Yeah, you cannot run a commercial fertilizer refinery, a massive steel plant, or a long-haul shipping freighter on ethanol-blended petrol.
The power just isn't there.
The energy density just isn't there, and the industrial processes require entirely different chemical inputs. So for that heavy lifting, India needs a structural moonshot.
Enter the National Green Hydrogen Mission.
Yes.
Let's demystify the tech for a second before I get into the economics, because the sources lay out a hydrogen color palette that is incredibly useful for visualizing the transition.
It really helps simplify things.
Right. So right now, the world largely runs on gray hydrogen. That is produced from fossil fuels, usually natural gas, and the carbon emissions from that process just go straight into the atmosphere. It is cheap, but it is dirty.
Very dirty.
Then you have blue hydrogen. This is still produced from fossil fuels, but the carbon emissions are captured and stored underground.
Right, and blue is effectively a half measure. It reduces the immediate environmental impact, but keeps the economy tethered to fossil fuel extraction.
Exactly. And then at the absolute top of the pyramid, you have green hydrogen.
The holy grail.
Yes. This is produced by a process called electrolysis, literally using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And the crucial detail is that the electricity used for this process must come entirely from renewable energy.
Zero emissions.
Zero emissions, just water and clean power.
Yep.
The numbers backing this up are astronomical. The government has laid out a total outlay of 19,744 crore rupees for the mission.
And most of that goes to one specific program.
Right. The bulk of that 17,490 crore is earmarked for the SITE program. That stands for Strategic Interventions for Green Hydrogen Transition.
SITE.
Yes. The ultimate target is to build 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen production capacity by 2030. And they project that achieving this will save 1 lakh crore rupees in fossil fuel imports.
Those numbers represent a fundamental structural pivot for heavy industry. But there's a foundational scientific concept we need to clarify here.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the biggest misconception floating around is that hydrogen is just a new primary fuel source. Like someone discovered a new type of coal mine or a zero-emission oil well.
Right, and it is not.
No. Hydrogen is an energy carrier. You have to think of it much more like a battery. You use renewable energy to create the hydrogen, you store the energy inside the hydrogen molecule itself, and then later you release that energy.
Either by converting it back into electricity using a fuel cell, or by combusting it directly in an industrial furnace.
That distinction is vital because it reveals the sheer scale of the logistical challenge. The difficulty isn't just using the hydrogen.
Right.
It's generating the immense amount of clean energy required to make it in the first place.
Exactly. The sources outline the implementation hurdles perfectly, and we can organize them into what we can call the 4 E's framework.
The 4 E's. Okay.
Yes. Electrolyzers, energy source, end use, and endogenous resources.
Let's break those down, starting with the first E, electrolyzers.
Well, the machines that actually perform the water splitting process are highly complex, and domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers in India is still in its infancy.
So we have to build the factories to build the machines.
Yes, but scaling this up isn't just about constructing new factories. It is a supply chain issue. Building these machines requires access to critical minerals, specifically nickel, platinum group metals, and rare earth elements.
Oh, I see.
So you have to be extremely careful that you aren't just trading a geopolitical reliance on imported Middle Eastern oil for a new reliance on imported critical minerals from other volatile regions.
You are just swapping one choke point for another if you don't secure the supply chain.
Exactly.
What is the second E?
The energy source challenge.
Hmm.
Because green hydrogen requires renewable electricity, hitting that target of 5 million metric tons of hydrogen requires an absolutely staggering 125 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity by 2030.
Let's pause on that number. 125 gigawatts of new capacity.
Just for this.
Right. The sources explicitly point out that this is nearly 3/4 of India's current total installed renewable capacity.
It's unbelievable.
We're talking about building almost an entire duplicate of the current national renewable grid from scratch just to plug in these hydrogen electrolyzers.
And the land acquisition alone for those solar and wind parks is mind-boggling.
Then you have to build the transmission lines, integrate it into the grid. The physical footprint of this is massive.
Which naturally leads to the third E, the end use challenge. Because hydrogen is an energy carrier, the laws of physics dictate that you face efficiency losses at every single stage of the process.
Oh, right. Conversion loss.
Yeah. You lose energy during the electrolysis to make it, you lose energy compressing and storing it, and you lose energy converting it back into electricity at the destination.
So it's not a perfectly efficient loop.
Not at all. If those conversion efficiencies aren't tightly optimized, the entire economic model collapses under its own weight. Furthermore, hydrogen is an incredibly tiny, highly combustible molecule. It leaks easily.
So the transport infrastructure has to be flawless.
Exactly. The safety standards and infrastructure required for transport, whether by specialized pipelines or cryogenic trucks, add massive logistical costs.
And the final E.
Endogenous resources. This is the hardest commercial reality check in the entire brief. Currently, it costs roughly 350 to 400 rupees to produce a single kilogram of green hydrogen in India.
400 rupees a kilo.
Yes. And at that price point, it is entirely uncompetitive. No steel manufacturer is going to voluntarily switch to a fuel that destroys their profit margins.
Of course not.
The entire survival of this mission depends on crushing that production cost down to below 100 rupees per kilogram.
Dropping the price from 400 to under 100? I mean, how does the government actually force that kind of price collapse? They can't just mandate that hydrogen is suddenly cheaper.
No, but this is exactly what the SITE program is designed to do. It functions as a direct financial bridge.
How so?
Right now, green hydrogen carries a massive green premium. SITE essentially provides direct subsidies to the private sector. The government steps in and pads the profit margins by subsidizing the cost of manufacturing the electrolyzers and the actual production of the hydrogen for the first few years.
Okay, so they absorb the initial loss.
Right. They artificially de-risk the market so that major industrial conglomerates feel safe deploying billions of dollars to build megafactories. The goal is to stimulate so much sheer volume that economies of scale eventually take over.
Driving the price down organically until the subsidies are no longer needed.
Ex-
But relying on the government to subsidize megafactories while simultaneously finding the capital to build 125 gigawatts of new renewable energy, that brings us to the most critical question of this entire deep dive.
The funding.
The infrastructure required here costs hundreds of billions of dollars. The government cannot just pull that out of the annual tax revenue. How is this actually being financed?
By fundamentally altering how environmental infrastructure interacts with global capital markets.
Exactly. Segment 3, Sovereign Green Bonds.
Yes.
In January 2023, the RBI executed a major structural move. They announced the first ever issuance of sovereign green bonds, or SGRBs, worth 16,000 crore rupees.
A huge milestone.
It really was. This capital raise was split into two tranches of 8,000 crore each, structured with 5-year and 10-year maturity periods.
To understand the mechanism here, you really have to look at how a standard sovereign bond works compared to a green bond. A normal bond is just the government borrowing money from institutional investors to fund the general fiscal deficit, promising to pay it back with interest.
Just general borrowing.
Right. But a sovereign green bond legally mandates that the proceeds must be ring-fenced and utilized exclusively for projects classified as environmentally sustainable.
Things like grid-scale solar, wind energy, and sustainable waste management.
Exactly.
But I want to push back on the underlying motivation here because globally there is a lot of corporate PR around sustainability.
Yeah.
Are massive institutional investors really buying these specific bonds because they suddenly developed a deep ethical concern for the environment? Or is this just a shiny financial instrument that looks great on an annual report?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, how does issuing a bond actually force a change in hard-nosed, profit-driven corporate strategy?
Well, this raises an important question about the mechanics of modern global finance, because it has very little to do with ethical awakenings.
Okay, then what drives it?
It is driven by systemic risk management and regulatory compliance. Globally, there are trillions of dollars managed by pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and massive asset managers that operate under strict ESG mandates.
Environmental, social, and governance mandates.
Right. They are legally or structurally required by their own limited partners to hold a specific percentage of certified green assets in their portfolios.
Ah, so they have a quota to fill.
Exactly. But they need a safe place to park that capital. By issuing sovereign green bonds, the Indian government is essentially building a federally backed bridge, connecting those massive pools of global capital directly to domestic environmental infrastructure.
Oh, so it solves a problem for the global funds. They need green assets, and India is offering them a sovereign-backed, low-risk instrument to fulfill those quotas.
Exactly. And the ripple effect on the domestic economy is profound. It influences business strategy because it creates what is known as a greenium, or a green premium in pricing, which effectively lowers the cost of capital for green projects.
Can you break that down?
Sure. If a domestic developer knows the government has this massive 16,000 crore rupee war chest specifically dedicated to funding renewable infrastructure, that developer is going to aggressively pivot their business model to win those contracts.
Because the money is cheaper.
Exactly. It mathematically aligns corporate profit motives with national environmental needs.
The cost of capital is everything. If you can borrow money cheaper to build a solar park than you can to build a coal plant, the free market will naturally build the solar park.
Precisely.
And this financial engine is tied to a very specific, hard target from the sources. In August 2022, the government officially committed to reducing the emissions intensity of its GDP by 45% by the year 2030 compared to 2005 levels.
And you cannot hit a 45% reduction in emissions intensity through policy papers alone.
No, you need actual infrastructure.
You need hard capital financing hard infrastructure. The green bonds are the vascular system delivering that capital.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, tracing the mechanics from the agricultural supply chain of ethanol all the way to global ESG capital markets.
That's a lot to process.
It is. So what does this all mean? If we synthesize this entire briefing, what is the underlying logic connecting these three moves?
Well, the overarching logic is that India is executing a highly coordinated economic pivot. They're treating the energy transition not merely as an environmental obligation, but as a once-in-a-century opportunity to architect total energy independence.
Okay, how do the pieces fit together?
Ethanol acts as the immediate tactical move. It plugs the financial leaks right now by saving Forex while securing the agricultural sector and decarbonizing light transport.
And hydrogen.
Green hydrogen is the strategic, long-term play targeting deep decarbonization for heavy industry and attempting to solve the hard-to-abate sector.
Right, and the bonds.
And the sovereign green bonds rewrite the financial rules of the game, providing the cheap, dedicated capital required to physically build the infrastructure for the other two pillars. It is a masterclass in interlinked structural policy design.
It is a phenomenal blueprint. Let's do a quick revision capsule for your notes so you have the memory anchors locked in.
Good idea.
You need to remember E20 by 2025, requiring 1,500 core liters of ethanol. You need to remember 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen, requiring 125 gigawatts of new renewables.
And remember the 4 E's of implementation challenges.
Right, the 4 E's. And finally, the 16,000 crore rupees in sovereign green bonds. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Something that builds on the mechanics we've just discussed, but pushes it into the future.
Okay.
The sources briefly mention the ultimate goal of making India a global production and export hub for green hydrogen.
Yes, utilizing their massive potential for solar and wind to produce the world's lowest cost renewable electricity, and thereby the cheapest green hydrogen.
Think about the geopolitical ramifications of that actually succeeding. Think back to our opening analogy of the battleship.
Hmm.
For its entire modern history, this nation has been a net importer of energy.
Right.
Its economic growth has always been fundamentally vulnerable to global supply chain shocks, spending massive amounts of foreign exchange just to keep the lights on and the engines running. Now, imagine they successfully pull off this green push.
If they actually manage it.
If they scale up the electrolyzers, they build the 125 gigawatts, and through the SITE program, they actually crash the cost of green hydrogen below 100 rupees a kilogram.
The strategic paradigm flips completely.
Exactly. What happens to traditional global power dynamics when a country historically dependent on imported oil suddenly becomes a net exporter of the fuel of the future? When the battleship doesn't just change its own engines, but starts selling fuel to the rest of the fleet. Consider how that single shift rewrites the geopolitical map of the world, and that is exactly why this deep dive matters. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.